Good communication skills and why it matters. We're going to find out more with Ken Cameron from Corporate Culture Shift and Russell Stratton from Blue Gem Learning. Let's jump in. I'm Heather Andrews, and on Behind the Book, we journey beyond the cover. On each episode, I dive deep into the minds of authors, unlocking the mysteries behind their literary creations. Discover the stories behind the book exclusively here with me. Welcome back. Previously, we spoke with Ken Cameron of Corporate Culture Shift and Russell Stratton of Blue Gem Learning, and together they have the podcast, workshop, and book called I Need to Ep and Talk to You. Previous episode was Another Effing Book. So welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having us back after that last debacle. I'm glad we made it back.
Nothing's a debacle. Anyway, as you know, with your book and Another Effing Book, you wrote recently in Culture Revolution with 11 other co-authors. And when we go into your chapter, that you give example of a dialogue that happens on a good conversation and a bad conversation, and then how it should go using a specific model, which we'll dive into. But when people come to your workshops and you are taking them through these dialogues, why do people come to your workshops? What is it that they struggle the most with?
I think that people come to our workshops for a couple of reasons. And I'm going to say a bit flippantly, they come to our workshop because their boss told them to.
Okay.
And that's something, and that's okay. Because, oftentimes people don't love going to workshops. They don't love going to, I got to take time away from work. Then when I get back to work the next day, it's going to be, my email is going to be like, email inbox is going to be overflowing. And I got to go through this learning thing. And then they find out that our workshops often involve an actor, and there's going to be an element of participation. And they're going to have to get up and practice having a difficult conversation. And then they really don't want to be there. So it's okay that people come to our workshops because they were told to. So I think maybe a more relevant question is, why do companies hire us to put people through this horrible experience of sitting through a group participation workshop? And the reason that the employers hire us to come in and do that is partly because it's a great way for the learning to stick.
Right.
When you come and you just read things in a book, you can kind of absorb it intellectually, but then you have to go out and actually put that into practice. And there's a giant gulf between understanding it up here and understanding it in the body.
Absolutely.
Right? There's a giant gulf between being able to understand a concept and being able to actually put it into practice. And what can happen in our workshops, because we bring in a live actor, we say, here's a model on how to structure a difficult conversation. And now let's go practice with the actor. Here's a scenario, and the actor is going to be the employee, and you're going to be their supervisor, and this is the issue you want to communicate to them. And then once they start actually putting that into practice, they begin to understand the nuance in a fully embodied way. Mm-hmm. And I think that the employers, the companies, and the leaders who are hiring us to come in and teach this to their people really recognize that is a great way to actually learn, and it's also a great way to protect the investment they've spent on learning. Mm-hmm. So rather than it just being, okay, spent the 4 hours in the workshop, got the binder, put it on my bookshelf where it now collects dust, they actually get to see those practices, those exercises put into practice right away.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful because people learn by experiencing, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Perfect. I'm sure you have something to add.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. And I think one of the interesting things is, why do we also get asked back again? So, we've had a number of our clients are repeat clients. Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes people will be back every year or every 2 years to run not exactly the same workshop, but maybe a slightly different, focus on it, but it will be using the same technique.
Right.
And I think it is that, the simulation part that people like. They're simulating having that conversation. They're practicing in real time. Mm-hmm. They're getting feedback in real time, which is really helpful for people. As Ken was saying, you try it, you can, you're learning it in your body rather than just, okay, here's the theory. And the other thing is that for the participants, we've had people say from companies where you would not think, they're frontline workers. These people are garbage collectors. They're people that work in construction. They're people that work in engineering, work on job sites. So if they're going to come and do a workshop, it'd be something that they actually one, get something from, but they also enjoyed. So we've had several people come to multiple workshops, sometimes bringing the rest of their team, because they said, well, we have to do some professional development, and if we're going to have to do something, we might as well do something that, one, is fun and we learn something. And that's one of the things we notice, particularly with frontline workers, that they respond, I'd say, as well, if not even better than office workers, because it's practical. If you use a backhoe for a living, how did you learn how to use a backhoe? Well, you got taught how to do it and then you practice doing it. And it's the same type of thing we're doing with them there. So they come in and people are like, oh yeah, I did this 2 years ago. This was great when we did this. That's why I said to my guys, they need to come and have some practice as well. So I think that practical element is the selling point for them.
I mean, who does that? Who signs up for the same workshop like twice, and brings their team, right? And we've also been told to keep it down. Like we've been at conferences where the people next door are complaining that nobody could hear their lecture on best accounting practices in their particular industry and the nuance of how the tax law is going to impact, because we were being too loud next door and everybody was laughing. So they've asked us to just kind of keep it down a little bit. So.
And I think one thing just to sort of point on with that, the sort of laughter, the workshops are fun. They're designed so that humour's okay. It's okay people would enjoy learning. That was the whole point. But the joke is never on the participant. I think that's important to emphasise.
Absolutely.
The joke's never on the participant. The joke is always either on Ken or I, or it's on the actor. And the actor, so they will say or do something that gets the audience to laugh. Yeah. We may say or do something that gets the audience to laugh. It's never making fun of the person that's there. And one of the techniques that we use for that is that we have a character called Bad Russell, okay? And the idea being, and Ken had suggested this, was okay, what about if you demonstrate the exercise, like we're going to have this difficult conversation and here's the actor as that person, but rather than showing people this is what it should be like, why don't you do it how it shouldn't be?
Right.
So I'm not an actor by profession. I have one role, I have one part I can play, and that is this sort of awful manager who's a bit like David Brent from The Office, and every worst nightmare that you could think of, just so that everyone laughs. They go to a mark out of 10. Of course, how mark out of 10 before how did Russ do? And it's always like 1, -1, and something. But it gives the benchmark for them is so low that, as Ken says to them, you're never going to be as Bad Russell. You're always going to be able to do better than he just did. So why not come up and give it a go? Because it can't be worse than that. It just breaks the ice for people. Now, of course, they also realise that I'm sort of playing along with that, so they get the idea. But it does just give people permission that I can try things because it's never going to be as bad as that. So I think that works well.
Yeah, it does, and it's rooted actually historically in the technique called forum theater. So we borrow from this technique called forum theater, and it's a form of start theater. So the way that it really unfolds is they show a play in which bad choices are made or bad things happen, and then at a certain point the action stops and they turn to the audience and say, well, what should they be doing? What should they do in this moment right now? And the audience has the opportunity then to come up and replace any one of the actors on stage. And so the classic example is this was developed in Brazil in the 1970s for the purpose of social change. So in the very first kind of iterations of this, there's they're trying to organize people in the poorest districts of Brazil to organize like a tenants union. So there's an apartment, there's a mother, there's a father, the father's out of work, the son's not going to school, the son's joining a gang, the mother's at her wit's end, and the landlord's going to come and kick them out. So pause. What should they do? And so somebody might come up and they might replace the mother character. And in fact, this is actually what happened. The first time he did this, it was I think it was the janitor, maid, who came up and replaced the mother character, and then just took the father, you go get a job, and you go to school, and pulled other people out of the audience, and you're the neighbors, and you're gonna be, and we're gonna get and then when the organizer went back the next year, there actually had been a tenants union. They actually took action. So we base our technique on this model. So we start with Bad Russell, so that the participants have a sense of what they need to intervene on and what the intervention should be, so that, as Russell says, they know what the baseline is, but it's also the sense of it's so much easier to start with something than it is to start with a blank page, for instance. Right?
Who wants to join me at this course? That sounds fun. And I know from exercises gone, not necessarily your workshop, but just a previous one that I went to years ago about difficult, like having conversations, it made me a better coworker and a better manager, but it also made me a better parent. And so the work that you're doing, especially in today, you know, because there's so much change in today's world, is just helping people become better communicators, which is going to be generational.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you say a little bit more about how it made you a better parent, the workshops that you were taking, and a better communicator, and how that mattered?
I learned that there was a different way to say something that meant the same without making the other person feel bad. You know, because so often, you know, we say to our children, that was just such a stupid thing to do. But it was like, you know, what made you make that decision? And it was I was asking more open-ended questions so that and then I learned to reiterate, to understand. So I started to listen, to understand and communicate, to really find out for the other person what was going on. And it was that shift that gave me the relationship with my kids to be closer. Instead of being that reactive parent, I might have been reactive in the moment, but it always made me think about pausing and then having that real conversation about what was going on for them. Because mine was reactionary, but theirs was, you know, something was going on for them. And that is why it made me a better parent, because today, and how I know it made me a better parent, is because we were very close after that, and there was no judgment in our home when I started to practice this communication with them. And I told them, I said, I want to learn this communication style, but I think that it's going to help us be less mom and son, mom and daughter, but more, you know, I mean, you're still that authority figure to them and you still have to keep them safe. But it made me communicate better with them and actually think that they had an opinion even at 12 and 13. And they'll still phone me today and say, Mom, because they're all working now. One's an engineer, one's a French immersion teacher, and the other one's on construction. And mostly my daughter and my oldest son, they're like, Mom, I need to understand your perspective on this. And can you explain it to me? And then we can talk about it. And so we talk about things that they're struggling with, and they've used some of those techniques even in dealing with their own friends.
Nice, nice. And can I ask you another follow-up question if you're open to that?
Absolutely.
So now I'm curious, in the work training you took that made you a better parent, then in becoming a better parent, were you able to reverse engineer that back into the workplace in some way?
Yes. When I was in management in corporate health in the private sector, I ran a clinic of over 100 people, which had 9 modalities. So I was reporting to upper management, private sector, partnership of doctors, and then I had 3 other management people that were alongside me. But we managed and had to bring workflows in. But I think one of the biggest pieces was how I facilitated meetings and how we built out workflows and how we really brought those change stakeholders into meetings and just to get that buy-in. But I think one of the biggest pieces and one of the best outcomes I had was I asked each person how they liked to be communicated with. And I interviewed each one, and I knew exactly my staff and I knew how they ticked, but I invested my time in that. And I had a chair in the corner of my office, and they knew that that was their safe space because it was frontline healthcare. That was their safe space when they were struggling with something. They would come in and I would look at them and I would say, hello. and they would say, I need to know this, this, and this. And we would have a dialogue about it. But sometimes I'm like, do you want to talk about anything? And they would say, no, I just need a moment of peace. And I would just keep typing. But how that made me a better manager was I was able to ask those communication questions. They were able to come back and we would have a more open dialogue about versus, you know, well, I'm your boss and you need to. That's not how I've ever operated, and it was just in those spaces that's how it made me a better manager.
Nice. Nice. I'm really glad that you're able to kind of tell us that story about your work. That's really great. Thank you.
And as a business owner and as a publisher dealing with people's stories, it has helped that skill set. But I'm finding in today's world that there's different ways that have changed with new generations coming up, or new ideas and a more, transversive world. And it makes me think that the work you're doing is instrumental, because you're teaching new communication styles probably in those workshops as well. Because the way we communicated 10 years ago is not how we communicate today. With millennials and things like that.
Yeah, well, thanks for that compliment. And this has been a really rich dialogue that we just had here in the midst of this interview that I think is really, these are the kinds of dialogues that Russell and I are able to, and Russell in particular is able to tease out of people on our podcast. So just these notions of that there's really less of a barrier between work and life than we think. And that the skills that we learn in one sphere can really inform the other. And Russell, you're really good at pulling these out of our guests on our podcast. And I think what you've just shared with us here is almost like a little template of what might happen on any one of our podcasts.
Yeah. And I believe when you were talking before, I've watched your podcasts, they're powerful. I think with the dialogue that happened within the Culture Revolution, and that's kind of why we're here, because we met each other through that, is that the culture is changing as well. And when Caitlin and Adam shared their vision with me and said, can you help us with this? I was like, absolutely. And it was near and dear to my heart when I interviewed all the authors and kind of got them in the directions that they were going. But it was really super powerful to me to hear everybody's story, because it was like, oh my goodness. Like I actually had a bit of teary-eyed, because it was just like, somebody's finally bringing this to somebody's finally bringing this to the forefront. And I think probably it went back to one of the things when you said was, if you choose not to be there, you're still choosing culture. So
yeah, you're just not talking about with the choices that you're not making.
Absolutely. As we wrap up today, this was such a great conversation. Thank you so much. Where can people reach out to you on social media?
Yeah, so for me, LinkedIn is always a great place. You can reach out to me at Russell Stratton, or otherwise seen as the Leadership Champ. Or alternatively, we do have our I Need to Effing Talk to You website, which has got details of our podcast, courses, and our first book. And we'll no doubt have details of the Culture Revolution on there soon too.
And I'm the same. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, but there's a bunch of Ken Camerons out there. So you're not looking for the astronaut. You're not looking for the guy who writes genre novels. You're looking for the Ken Cameron from Corporate Culture Shift, also known as the Shift Disturber. And so you'll find me there. And you can find both of us, and you can find out about the workshops that we run on our joint website, I Need to Effing Talk to You. That's F-ING. I Need to Effing Talk to You.com.
As we wrap up today, make sure you check out the previous episode of Another Effing Book, and make sure you check out the Culture Revolution book on Amazon as well, to really take your culture in your company or your life to the next level. And make sure you join us for the next one, where we're going to dig further into their story, but also their communication model that they emulate in both books. Till next time. It's been a literary voyage here on Behind the Book. My sincerest thanks to our featured authors for letting us peek behind the curtain. I'm Heather Andrews, urging you to keep exploring the vast universe of literature. Until our next chapter, happy reading.